Welcome to the Dance Centre podcast. I am your host, Claire French, and I'm joining you from the traditional unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh peoples, also known as Vancouver, Canada. I'll be talking to dancers, choreographers and other members of the dance world here on the West Coast to find out more about their creative work and practices and to discuss what it means to us to be dance professionals today. Thanks for joining us. I am absolutely delighted to be joined by Gabrielle Martin and Jeremiah Hughes of Company C, or Corporeal Imago Performance Society. I've seen some of their work recently, and I'm just always enthralled by their background and just how they're investigating concept with the aerial dance, but also just what they've achieved in their lives. So I'm going to start with Gabrielle Martin, who's an aerial and contemporary dance artist, choreographer and artistic producer who's performed over 1,400 shows internationally. We'll be drawing on that information throughout this podcast. And so I'm going to save some of the highlights and we'll hear from Gabrielle herself. But she is extremely well awarded. She has a degree from Concordia University. She's been performing and presented all over the world. From 2011 to 2015, Gabrielle toured full-time with Cavalier, performing aerial rope, bungee trapeze, bungee dance, and harness dance numbers. And in 2015, she began working with Cirque du Soleil as part of the creation of Throe, the first flight, and was also a principal performer with that company until it closed in 2019. We will hear about all of the rest. I'm just going to move to Jeremiah quickly, but not to pass over you, my dear. Jeremiah Hughes began his training in competitive dance at the prestigious Canadian Dance Company in Toronto. And after a decade of competing internationally and representing Canada on the world stage, he enrolled in the interdisciplinary Randolph College for the Performing Arts in Toronto, where he expanded his craft with acting, singing, and stage combat. He's also been a featured soloist on So You Think You Can Dance and So You Think You Can Dance Canada. And he has also worked in Cirque du Soleil and on the production of Throe. And we will find more about this later. They are co-directors of Corporeal Imago. And we are going to be talking to them about that company, the origins of that company, and now their residence here in Vancouver, and also their up-and-coming work Throes that will be on at the Dance Centre. We've also had the pleasure of seeing a small showing of that through the Dance Centre. But without further ado, let's hear from them, shall we? Enough of my voice. Gabrielle and Jeremiah, welcome. Thank you so much for taking this time to talk with me.
Hi, yeah, thanks for inviting us to chat with you. It's really exciting for us.
Hi, Claire.
Hi.
Yeah, and we'll just acknowledge that we're chatting with you from the traditional unceded territories of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh, where we're privileged to be working with Company C, or Corporeal Imago.
There you go. You got Corporeal Imago. So
yeah.
Now we all know.
Thanks.
It's very important. Now we have no excuse. Thank you so much. Okay, wonderful. So we've got so much to talk about, but we would love to start in some ways at what you think is your beginning. What would you like the listeners to know about your beginnings in dance? Maybe not necessarily training, maybe in relationship to what you would consider a key stage of your career.
Well, I mean, interesting. I when people ask like, okay, when did you start dancing, or what was like how did you find dancing? Typically, I kind of have the same story, which I enjoy. When I was 11, my mother remarried. I got my dad. And so at their wedding, I'm 11 years old. They had a huge dance floor out and a DJ. And I went out and kind of got on the dance floor for one of the first times in my life. And I was out there till 1 a.m. just dancing my heart away, realizing that this is something that I really connected with and really enjoyed doing, was just this practice of embodiment. And so I was eager and happy to kind of pressure my parents for the entire following summer. Of like every day I'd be like, I want dance classes. Okay. And the next day, I want dance class. I want to be good at this. Yeah, I played a bunch of sports. I was a really very physically invested person. So at 11, I was like, I want to dance, which was a bit of a rude awakening when I first came to my first dance studio. And I realized that everybody I was training, everybody my age, started when they were 2. So it was that was my beginning, was at my parents' wedding.
Love it.
And I think just because I do know Jeremiah quite well, I think an important part of your story is also how like that was the place that you found like your confidence and kind of your second home, which I think is really beautiful.
That's where, so at that place that you said, the prestigious Canadian dance company, Alan Lupien, and of course Don Lupien, but particularly I had a really strong connection with the faculty there. And I went from being an 11-year-old to going, I kind of want to dance, but I have no idea what I'm doing. And I didn't have family that danced or in the arts. And then I was able to, within about 5-6 years, start competing to represent Canada on a national level. So it was just, they really do talk about the importance of having good teachers and good mentors and good coaches and what that can do for a child. And the more I've traveled around the world, the more I've come to realize how fortunate I was to have that studio come into my awareness and to be lucky enough just to be at the right place and right time. Because now those guys are all doing huge TV stuff across Canada. Anybody who's watched like The Next Step TV show for kids has watched my home studio. That's the same company. So that's I'm very fortunate to have had such a rigorous training. It was very intense, but driven around the idea not of like technique first, but passion and performance first. And that was where I found my connection.
So great. It feels like it kind of channeled your competitive spirit too from your sports kind of.
I'm hugely competitive, and I which is to my own detriment, but also the reason why I've gotten where I've gotten. So
Exactly.
I was able to make it be like, no, I'm going to perform to my absolute best to win, versus it be, I must point my toes that much harder. So it was the right environment for me.
Yeah, fantastic. And Gabrielle?
Yeah. Well, I really came into my physical practice through sports first. I think I, was enrolled in ballet like almost with like a lot of young children. And it really wasn't for me, that type of physicality. But having like an intense physical practice has always been really integral to who I am. And then through sport, I came to circus. It's not actually through ice hockey. I came to fire dancing. It doesn't necessarily make sense. But, as a teenager, the kind of team sport environment just wasn't aligning with my interests. I was hanging out with hippies in the park and wanted to spin fire. And then through that, I found a channel to perform, actually. So it's more performance that brought me to dance, physical performance, but it was less about training in the dance studio and more about having early experiences of being able to perform for an audience and what can transpire in that space. And that is kind of what then, catapulted my career. When I was in my late teens, I saw Akram Khan perform Rush, one of his early works in like 2001 at the Culture. And that was a pivotal moment for me, where that physicality on stage, and also because, his integration of classic Indian dance with contemporary, to me, just spoke to me in a different way than the work I'd seen before, which actually I hadn't had a lot of opportunity before. The Culture's youth program enabled me to see work for really for like $2. So a little shout out to their youth program. But yeah, and then that kind of catapulted me. I started to study more like release techniques. So body mind centering with Jennifer Maskell, contact improv at EDAM. And then from there, I just realized that I wanted to have more capacity in my own body and more tools to be able to express myself physically. And that took me to Montreal to study at Concordia, partly because it was a program that focused on creative process, but also because it was the only one that would take me, because I didn't have any like ballet or years of technique behind me. And then I also studied aerial circus or aerial dance forms independently in Montreal, because it's such an incredible mecca for that work. So that was kind of parallel, and that's a little bit of my trajectory.
Do you remember when you were training with Jennifer Maskell and Peter Bingham, like Maskell Dance and EDAM? What time frame was that?
Yeah, that would have been the early 2000s. I went to Concordia in 2006, so probably from 2001, through 2005, that kind of era.
Great. So great. And so how did Cirque come up for both of you? I'm jumping maybe a little bit, but I feel like when I was in England, before I kind of knew about Canada, just in general, as I knew what the dance community or what the dance world was, and before I even thought of coming here to train myself, I learned about Cirque. And when I went to my first Cirque show on the outskirts of Toronto, Orange was sponsoring it, that time frame, you may remember. I saw the show and I cried like a baby because it felt like a part of my performance life and my art life that I had not yet been able to reach or touch. It was Kidam actually at the time, and there was just something about the narrative, the literalness of it, and the scale of it that just kind of destroyed me in that moment. And it was also so beautiful, and it made me think that everything was possible in performance in some form. And so it really, like, it holds a very special place in my heart. But I'm wondering how you two found Cirque, or how it found you, or how that worked, because my experiences of it is unforgettable, just as an audience member, spectator. But I mean, I also sought it out. I also made sure I went to see a live show, and I've seen several since. And that initial experience of it has worn off. I've become just as interested in the tech people climbing the poles at the side of the stage. So I love going to see it from the restricted view angles, because, as I'm kind of becoming more as an artist and more involved in process and those things, and more interested in that aspect, watching how people work just at all the ways in which a performance comes together through all of the different ways that people are working is what excites me now. So it's kind of switched. It's kind of an inverted thing. But what's your either pull to Cirque, or what was your draw to it?
I think I'll jump in just because Kidam, interestingly, was the first Cirque show that I saw, probably back around the same time, like 2000 for me, when I was about 18. And actually, just a little shout out, Franco Dragone, who directed that show, just passed away 2 days ago. And he is very important for a lot of what we represent with Cirque du Soleil, because he directed a lot of the early shows. And I agree that show was really profound for me. And I think it planted a seed. Seeing the aerial performances specifically in that work planted a secret dream inside of myself that I didn't, acknowledge to the rest of the world, and barely to myself until many years later. But that, like for so many people, Cirque du Soleil really did offer that gift of, one, just like showing what circus can do, but also I think because it brings, like new illusions and new, they work so much with fantasy, especially that show and a lot of their early works, which, in our kind of, in the contemporary world of circus, or of dance and theater, and the kind of postmodern movement with the hyperrealism, I think it's something that sometimes we miss. And I know for me, that draws me to circus, and especially that kind of circus work that I've seen, the more contemporary, that bring you into this fantastic world. And I would also describe it as visual theater, which is something that we talk about our work lying at the intersection between aerial circus, contemporary dance, and visual theater. And I also just, to say, I had mentioned how I started out with circus, kind of exploring performance through circus and then moving to dance in my own trajectory. And I think that circus, there was something accessible about circus for me, in the sense that I could go out there and perform with, my hula hoop skills, my fire breathing skills, that are skills, but, I could express myself in performance without having, you need like 15 years of technical dance training behind you before you can get on a stage. And so there's something quite accessible about that. And also how circuses are kind of at the intersection, the physicality is so key, but it's also more theatrical than dance, I think also allowed me to express the part of myself that, I always think that if I wasn't a dancer, I would be a theater artist, even though there's such proximity, but often also a large difference in terms of the type of work you do as an artist and the type of training and experience you have on stage. So I could say a lot more about circus, but I'll let Jeremiah do some talking.
Fine. No, I remember seeing my first, speaking just in specifics to Cirque du Soleil, because I didn't have much exposure to other forms of circus leading for a very long time. So I remember the big tents would come through Toronto once a year. It's where I grew up, and my family would take me and my brother to go, and pretty much once a year we'd see a show. And I remember, I think one of the first ones I saw was Corteo, and it was, I only know that now because of years later going, I have these visions just stuck in my head of these beautiful scenes that I have to be like, there's these beds, and there's this thing with a chandelier. And it took me being actually in the company and knowing the entire breadth of their work to go, it was that show. That was the show that it first got me. And for particularly, it was just that the work was so beyond a scale and was realized so much further than the stage that it was on. And I had never seen work that was bigger than the venue. And the venue itself was a tent. And it was like just walking up to a tent like that, you would think, oh my God, this is like just the spectacle of coming to this thing is the cool thing. I get to go inside a tent. And then by the time you leave, you're like, nope, that was the show. And it was bigger than anything else I experienced. So that was probably the thing that has like sat with me the most. Then later through training, I picked in the Canadian Dance Company, I picked up like tumbling skills, some acrobatic skills. And then I traveled and I was working in like Orlando and theme parks. And I picked up some creaturey kind of movement from shows. And then I'm living in Las Vegas. And I mean, I've been auditioning for Cirque on and off and been considered for roles a few times for like shows like Hughes, what have you. And it was really wonderful to make a connection with the casting team and like some wonderful directors, Nicole Lamontage, like there's some wonderful dancers who are now facilitating other dancers and works to be as rich as they are, but they'll never be called out in a podcast, but they're wonderful people. So it was this an ongoing conversations. And then eventually I was one of those types of people that was kind of good at everything. Because I never specified. I was never just a tap dancer. I was never just a hip hop dancer. And then eventually I started getting the opportunity to do some auditions and being in the room, being a dancer who then could tumble, being an acrobat who could dance kind of energy, availed me a few roles. And one of them was I had the casting director be like, hey, we have this amazing role for a creation for Cirque du Soleil. You want to send your aerial net, aerial chain, aerial pole, all these like a crazy list of all the different things that I was like, I looked at it and said very clearly, I've auditioned for them enough times and I have a very good relationship. I'm always so honored when they ask, but I don't do any of these things. So here's what I'll do. I'll put out my best video. I'll say with a gracious energy of a thank you for considering me. Here's me failing at these different things you asked to see, and here's a couple things I'm good at. And they ended up saying that they wanted to see more, which absolutely surprised me. But then I took that second video even more seriously and sent it in. And through the process of working on our show that we actually met on, Throe, the first flight, it was a co-collaboration with James Cameron's Avatar and Cirque du Soleil, coming together to create one massive, immersive video projected world. So we took over entire arenas. We had it roughly 8,000 people a night, 8,000 people a show, 2 shows a night, 6 nights a week, or maybe six shows a week, or up to 10 sometimes. So we really packed those houses, and it was a video projection of the entire ice arena from the edge of the ice to the blue line. We had a massive video projected world that interacted with us as we moved in this space. The video projections were mapped off of our movements. And so we had microphones and we had given the space, but it also meant they're like, cool, now you're going to go climb this amazing rope and you're going to go and do these things. And myself had never really had experience with those elements. So funny enough, back when I was first joining the cast, I had turned to somebody I had good chemistry with and who I respected. I just turned to Gabrielle and said, yeah, these coaches are expecting me to do this really big thing on stage, and I'm terrified. What do I do on my breaks? How do I train? And she gave me a bunch of exercises. And after 2 weeks of vacation, I came back and I wasn't falling off the rope at massive height. So that was pretty cool. And then eventually we started making that a little bit of a collaboration, and we can get into all that later. But yeah, It was actually through my work with Cirque that I found aerial, because again, just being a bit of a jack of all trades and picking up skills as I go. Oh, I'm in this show, I'm a ballroom dancer. Oh, I'm in this show, I'm a crump dancer. In this show, I need to learn how to do aerial. So then all of a sudden, having a pretty high level aerial coach and pretty high level aerial training for a few years, now I'm an aerialist.
Absolutely. And it's all infused so much with all of this other experience. I think your work, I think that's what's, so important and exciting about that is, for the listeners who may not know, you will kind of be rewarded from their training and all of these experiences that they're talking about in their shows. I think conceptually and also content wise, but when I haven't seen everything you've ever done, but I feel very confident in saying that. So thank you for talking about Cirque like that, and kind of sharing those details. It's special to me to hear all of this, and also a little bit of the audition process as well for you, and how different it is for each person. And when they go through those audition things, how important it is to make connections, right, as well.
I actually had, like, I got to say, the audition process for me, at least in Toronto, was like so wonderful because they cut it down. They did, with Nicole Lamontage, she cut it down to 4 people after like 2 days out of like hundreds, which sounds brutal. And it was. And they'd be doing like a ballet pass, and they'd have ballet dancers go and leap across the space, and they do a beautiful jeté, and they get cut. And I later was able to ask questions. I was like, what the heck? Why would you, like, that was clearly the best jeté in the room, maybe, like, or one of, like, why did they get cut doing the thing they were good at? And Cirque was like, yeah, no, we know they're good at that. And we also saw that they weren't good at other things. So if they're not good at the thing that they're good at, they're not, like, they weren't world level at that one thing. So my mind was being boggled because I'm like, I have to follow like national ballet dancers and I have to cross the space, and they just got cut. Okay, well, it was nice being here. But then by the end, it was this, they ended up taking the entire second day just to do like a long workshop with the dancers to really see what they could kind of harness from there. And it's fun too, because that was like 10 years ago. And so like the audition video pops up as like something that a Cirque casting video occasionally. And I get to see all the people I was doing stuff with and see how they're all doing some pretty cool things too now. And it was very formative. It was some of like, this is early auditioning for me before I even had roles in shows. And so it was just that, like, having people not just try and like figure out who I was, but take the time to nourish something else too in an audition was, it was a unique thing that I was spoiled to have early on.
Yeah, so great. Gabrielle, do you want to share anything about your, it doesn't have to be Cirque related, but maybe some key influences or key stages of your career like that, like roles particularly maybe, or experiences traveling that have really left a mark on you for your work?
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting that you talk about traveling, because I was looking at, you sent some questions in advance, and so one of them about, key kind of events wasn't really related to performance, but does, affect who I am and therefore the work I create, which is, when I was in my mid-teens, I traveled to Zimbabwe, which is where my father lived at the time, where that side of my family is from. And it was a really formative experience for me because it was a moment where I understood how fluid identity can be. Having grown up in Vancouver, at that point as a teenager, I identified as Black, and I was from a low-income family. And then when I went to Zimbabwe, the context I was in identified me as white, and I was with my family there is colored. My family there was middle class. But what does it mean to be middle class in an economy that in a developing nation that is so impoverished? So all my understanding about like class and race were kind of flipped on their head. And that, I think, has affected me in the sense that in my own work, I'm less interested in expressing my own sense of identity or identity politics in my own work, because I feel like, whenever I start to talk about identity or to reflect, I feel like, it's so context-based. And so that was a really formative experience just in terms of who I am, and therefore also affects my work. And then, I would also talk about auditioning. Interestingly, I know that was part of the last question, sort of, but the experience of, and joining these major companies. So in 2011, I joined Cavalia, but not after auditioning. Like, it was my 4th audition that I got it, not after. Failure is a big theme in my career and in my experience, a humiliating failure, like it is for many people though. But I think when I first got on that show, I was able to acknowledge kind of my secret dreams. I had mentioned how the secret desire had been planted from having seen Kidam at that point almost 10 years prior. And I think at that moment I was like, oh, okay, maybe I can manifest my dreams. And then I think I embraced my capacity to will things into being from that point. And so that was a big event. There's several other events in terms of like our work together, what kind of sparked that, and the development of our company. Yeah.
I will say just that her journey is like, she's a very, clearly I should think highly of the person that I've chosen to be in partnership with, but like her journey is very inspirational of like how hard she worked at from such an age. So I teach youth in circus right now. And A lot the typical demographic is young women, and I just hold her on a pedestal and be like, yeah, you can start later, and if you have like the level of drive and realism about what it takes, and really setting those dreams, you can really, it actually is possible. I started at age 11, and I always considered myself to be a late start, and I couldn't imagine people reaching kind of the stages I had later than that in life, starting a career in dance later in life. And I was already peers with, clearly we met on the job, but as peers with Gabrielle, respecting her greatly. And then it was only through like getting to know her deeper, I was like, wait, you're like so much, you started so much later and you had these experiences. And I'm like, oh, this is incredible what you've been able to accomplish. So clearly I should think highly of the person I've chosen a partnership with, but sincerely I do.
Yeah. Well, the thing I'm getting from this as well is that is experience. Like you say, failing at things and failing more than others, but that's because you've been willing to experience so much and put yourself into a position to be able to not just learn from those, you learn from them inevitably, but put yourself there. I mean, it really is incredible. Yeah.
Well, I mean, we talk about Delta Bray that way then. Delta Bray in Edinburgh.
Oh.
Yeah, failure, on the theme of failure.
On the theme of failure and failing forward.
Let's do it. Yes, let's talk about that.
Well, I'll give the preface, which is, when we talk about the kind of inspiration for our company, we were both at a dance intensive, Delta Bray Danza in Spain, taking classes. And this festival has a lot of circus and dance classes, and then lots of performances. And we were seeing so much work, and we were seeing... that's where we kind of really understood that our interests as choreographers or creators really align. We were seeing a lot of work where artists were doing so much and not necessarily saying a lot. And that's something that we could identify with too, having been, our careers have been mostly in entertainment, like, trick based. Okay, how impressive are your oversplits, this kind of stuff. So it is, we totally could understand how easy it is to fall into that mentality. And then, so that's kind of where our interest started. And then we did create the first version of our work, Limbs, which we are so grateful for. The Isadora Award was awarded to us for that work, which was such an incredible affirmation, specifically because of the journey we were on with that piece. And as creators, we took an early version to Edinburgh.
Okay, so we closed our Cirque du Soleil show in 2019, and it was in June. Point is that I think we closed it on a Friday. We flew back to Montreal on a Saturday. We were teching on a Tuesday in Montreal Complement Cirque, Le Autre Cirque. We were like a part of the festival, but we hadn't even been able to run a full pass of the work because we've been living on tour. We created this work backstage at Cirque and in like random gyms along through Europe. So then when we finally got like to Montreal, we're like, okay, it makes sense conceptually, but we haven't been able to fully run all the scenes for technical reasons in the spaces we've been in. We've been provided in the past. So here we go. And then they're like, oh, good news. Your shows are so sold out that we're going to sell your tech show. Your tech run we're going to bring all the presenters to that one because we couldn't fit them in the other shows. And we're like, that's terrible. So we jumped in. So that was an ego death. And then we took a couple weeks off because we were going to Edinburgh right away. We already had our deposits in. We had to do all these things way out. Took a couple weeks to go, oh my God, are we going to just like gut this entire show and like rebuild it? And we're like, no, we have to stay true. We actually like what we're doing. We just need to like realize it further. So we went back into a little bit of creation time at the Centre de Création in Dordogne.
Mm-hmm.
And it jumped over to Edinburgh and proceeded to do a show every night, except we didn't know that there's some like kind of cultural dark nights that people take because it was our first time there. So people are like, oh yeah, oh, you're going to work on the dark day? And we're just there like getting our costumes on and going, I guess so. And we absolutely ran the gauntlet of being our own flyers, being on the front lines, getting the feedback, developing the show, watching the show every night and being like, okay, we could do this better. We could do this, being our own dance captains and giving notes and ego death for about a month. So if we hadn't gotten it as artists throughout our entire training, we definitely got a condensed version of it for an entire month. But what came from it became pretty strong.
Yeah, I mean, the piece just wasn't ready. We were so eager to create. We were parched for creative expression. That wasn't the same show we'd been doing for 4 years. And, I think both of us had a certain artistic depth that even though we were playing principal characters in that show, we just felt, it wasn't the théâtre that we wanted to be part of in terms of the depths we wanted to go with our characters on stage and whatnot. So, that piece was born from that, and then it just wasn't ready. And so we presented it for 25 shows in Edinburgh when it wasn't ready and had people walking out every night. No. But then we did end up coming back to Vancouver and reworking it, and an evening by ourselves as performers and choreographers, not recommended. This is the two of us in our own little bubble, wondering why we were doing it. And then there's a lesson about perseverance there, I suppose. And then also, and seeking knowledge where you were missing it, because in that time I did a program in dramaturgy, and, Jeremiah and I being in partnership, we would talk about dramaturgy every night and talk about, what that meant. And that's nothing that either of us had really studied before. And so that gave us kind of a new perspective with which to approach it. And we were very rewarded by how much it touched the people who saw it. So that was a huge affirmation.
That's great. I wonder if your company is also a little bit of a freedom from character, from having to take on a character and that's part of a kind of narrative or a theme or a story. So you kept hold of themes and concepts and learned so much from that in terms of artistic vision, which I think is really great. But then also being able to kind of just, facets of you as people in the work, as opposed to feeling like when you mentioned depth of character, it's like more depth of your characters as human beings, perhaps, in the work that you have now. I noticed that connection. But discovering that in Edinburgh is a whole thing in itself. So I've been to Edinburgh Festival many, many times. So many stories, right? Yeah, many stories, that place. In fact, one of my favorite all-time shows ever in my life, I saw at 10 o'clock in the morning at the Edinburgh Fringe. It was Generally Better Productions, and they're a mime company.
Cool.
But from the Jacques Lecoq School, all of them were trained in there. And it was on at 10 o'clock in the morning, and we saw it by accident. We saw it before breakfast by accident, and it's one of the best shows I've ever seen in my life. So there you go.
That place is just packed. It's crazy how the city just transforms. And it was our first time there, and we had heard wonderful things and heard about the energy, and then we're just thrust into it and just trying to catch the running treadmill.
Absolutely. That's so great. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about your collaborative endeavors, maybe how you met, and how that's it's lovely to hear your collaboration forming and the work that you're doing. It's a very natural kind of introduction to you two. Is there anything you'd like to say, how did it become formalized as a company? Did it become formalized? Is that part of the dramaturgy stage, or was it pre-Edinburgh? Or how did that happen? I say formalized, but you know what I mean.
We are now a society. We one of the great things. So we'd been living on the road, on the same show for 4 years, and I'd been on the road for 4 years before that.
4.5 plus creation. I always say 5.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then we left tour, and we were kind of, floating in the wind, trying to find how and where to anchor ourselves. We tried Las Vegas, and then COVID hit, and then we tried Montreal, and then we ended up here, all within that crazy, 2020. And one of the things that we've been craving, which is so special that we have now, is a team of collaborators. And that's what, was missing before. We knew that it's not ideal to perform in your own work. I mean, to both be performing in our own work, doing a duo with doing the tech and the promotion all ourselves, but it was just a nature, a circumstance, And so now we have we're starting to establish this incredible community of collaborators with whom we're working with on Throe, which is the piece that's premiering at the Dance Centre November 17th to 19th. So I think that's, we've incorporated, that happened last year. And then the other kind of formalizing, I would say, is establishing this community of collaborators.
Mm-hmm. We felt very capable of clearly we could make the two of us alone together could take a show and take it to Edinburgh. We could find successes, ego death, and some success. but we were able to do that and we were proud of ourselves. But then this becomes a thing of like, yeah, but if you want to do more, like we hadn't even been able, we were living in hotels. We didn't have anywhere to set roots and to really build community, have anything like-minded people, because all the people we had been traveling with were people that our bosses had decided for us to become family. So here we're able to actually reach out and find amazing costumers, lighting design, composers, dancers, and then like collaborators like the dance center and other environments that like where we're so grateful for the resources, but having that like-minded people who believe in us, people who we believe in, and then able to kind of go into the studio. I mean, we were just in the studios the last couple of days and just feeling inspired. We took a small break, which because we were just coming off of maternity leave, a little maternity break. She's going into maternity break, and I was coming out of paternity. So,
awesome.
Point is we had our first rehearsals back, and we had a little bit of time away, and it felt like home because we have dancers who we really appreciate, respect, and trust, and value to have in the space, and being able to get back into with our composers' music, and we already have the costumes, we know our lights, we see the world, and so feeling incredibly inspired. And so it's like, oh man, we haven't done this in a couple months. All right, let's hop back in the studio and going, oh, it's better than it was even before. It's so good.
Yes, well, a lot's happened as well for you too.
We're trying new things,
like babies.
Yeah, we just had a baby. Little baby Loic is 7 weeks old.
Oh.
Yeah, so another creative project of ours. I did want to just hop on that train of thought in terms of, collaborators and the community you're part of, because I think one of the things that brought us together, we're partners in life as well as in creation. But when we were working in Cirque, we were two of the only members of a 38 member cast whose formative background was primarily dance. And so there was something about that drew us together in terms of our approach to the work as well, because I think we were two of the people who treated the stage as a sacred space. And that is, I think a lot of people we were working with came from more gymnastics or sport. Right. And so that kind of that belief in performance as ritual and a ritual practice and a space where you can transform yourself and where communion can be experienced. I think for both Jeremiah and I, it's like a spiritual practice as well. And so I think that's also what drew us together was how serious we took it, even though it's play, the sacredness of that practice and that space.
Yeah, there was different vibes within the cast. There was some people I would refer to one dressing room as a locker room and one as a dressing room, because it's okay. People had different reasons for being there and their bosses thought it was okay. So that was in my position at that time to correct. But for us, it was it's hugely about catharsis and about embodiment and about growth. There's so many things that you can channel. You can channel divinity through yourself and try and become something on stage, especially when you're having the energy of 8,000 in a spotlight and you have your script is literally have an emotional, spiritual experience on stage and you are given the space to do so. It's I can find that. I can find that pretty quick. And it's a wonderful practice to have. So it was an absolute blessing and a gift that we really were present to and took absolute advantage of every opportunity we had to play those kinds of roles. And then in doing so, just recognizing each other's commitments, strengths, and who we were as people kind of ended up having us just magnetize and gravitate to each other. And that's why we said that Delta Bro is so interesting, because until then we had worked in we'd seen a couple shows online and we had been in our own show and spoke about the process of our own touring show. But then in watching other people's works and watching so much work and being in such an artistic environment for a while, we really had an opportunity to see the other facets of each other and the dimensions and really notice that we have aligned values.
So just along what you were saying, I think I'm just looking at your description of the company and how you chose to write your description, and the word disenchantment really stands out because I think that helps. It's so intentional, actually, as a kind of the enchantment of Cirque and the enchantment of all of those worlds, but to own that and to kind of honor that at the same time. But the disenchantment is actually, also speaks very strongly to the direction that you have chosen, that So disenchantment in terms of, almost to me, it connects to ritual or connects to that idea of sacred space, because you're not always enchanted. You're not always in that zone of being enchanted. It's a process in itself to experience that. And then the dis is extremely important in that process of, that is that almost like the other extreme, but it still very much speaks to this, the scale and the size and the kind of, and the weight almost of what's behind the company, in a good way, the theatrical weight, significance that's behind the company. I think that's really, I found a real connection to that.
Yeah. I think we also talk about our work kind of expressing contemporary tragedy or being of contemporary tragedy, because I think, we're living in tragic times. And so there's, potential for catharsis there in terms of acknowledging that on the stage, in terms of exploring tragedy. And we also have talked about our work as an opportunity for us to explore like the shadow side of the human experience. Having worked in entertainment for so long and been all about like the wow and the happy and the fun, which are also important. But then there's a whole other spectrum of emotions that are maybe more true if we, stop and reflect on what's happening in the world. And I think we also are interested in creating new illusions, that this is a time where, we have, well, there's not a lot of ritual spaces left, in society. The stage is one of them. We walk in circles of mostly atheists. We're in a time where we, don't, as a culture, hold on to mythologies as, that we have. And a lot of contemporary work is in this hyper realist kind of mode. And so I think it's also like we do need, while we're not trying to solely entertain people now with our company's work, as we were doing for so long before with Cirque, we are creating new illusions or creating entire worlds that we hope can transport people. And that's also why the audiovisual element is so important in the work we're doing.
Yeah, we definitely have it's a deeply the goal, and what I feel like we're succeeding in is deeply immersive work of audiovisual, of creating an environment in a space that we would like the audience to enter and have never experienced before. It's not that it's foreign. It's not that we're trying to be chaos, but as much as it's like you enter and go, I haven't seen this. This is definitely a unique, immersive, deep environment that transcends the stage. And ideally, keeping that from what we were speaking earlier, where it's like it's bigger. You enter a black box, like at the dance center, somewhere Patreons have been many a time, and to see something that completely makes you reevaluate the space that you're in, like treating the bodies as like the bodies themselves as metaphor in space, allowing them to be up at like 30 feet in the air and slowly rolling or falling and descending, is something that I kind of know you haven't seen at the dance center, because we've had to work with the incredible Sheng Yin constantly to put those points up into the ceiling. So there's very few companies, only one other company that I'm aware of, and very few opportunities to see this environment reimagined and presenting an entire other face of itself. So
yeah, I think it's fair to say that Ariosa in town, Julia Taff as artistic director, most of her work though has been seen on the outside of the building.
Yes,
so there is, I think I'm not speaking for her, of course, and her and Julia Carr, but that they would be. They're doing very different. Their aesthetic is very different, even if, the dancers are up in the air, and they've used that space quite differently, in the building quite differently to you. And they have their outdoor performances and things like that. So it is very different, which is very exciting, I think, as well, because it shows the versatility of the aerial dance as well.
We definitely benefited from them having those first conversations and being able to create in that space. Like, they've been so generous since we moved to town, and also helping us, because when we had those first conversations with venues, we'd say, hey, we want to put like a bunch of dancers in the air and have them like fly, and then they're going to swing, and we're going to do all these crazy things. And a lot of times you can imagine from a responsibility level or safety, people just would say no. It's very easy to say no, but Dance Center was like, okay, we've had something like this before. We can work with you if you guys are of a level, and so you just opening a conversation made us able to do these incredible things.
Yeah, absolutely. That's that kind of community thing you're talking about as well, how it kind of branches out to like, kind of co-production partners or just collaborate or just people to talk to about what you're doing. I think it's amazing. Yeah, it's great. Thank you so much, both of you. It's very exciting. Is there anything else? Well, I'm excited to see Throws. I keep saying Throws. Is it Throw?
It's Throe. It is kind of
I love
that play
saying that.
on throes, being in the throes. We kind of refer to this piece as having the artists or the bodies that you see in space being in the throes of survival. It's a play on throes.
But the world of Throw. So
Mm-hmm.
so I'm looking forward to seeing the premiere of it, and again, I feel grateful to have been at the studio showing, and part of that feedback that you kind of were all involved in. That was really wonderful, and the dancers. It was great to see your dancers who I've seen in other contexts, like especially Aowen and Isaac, who I've seen in other contexts, in this context, which is really great. And I think that that's probably got something to do with your teaching and your coaching abilities. And I'm not 100% sure how much they were involved in aerial before you two. But I wondered if, for me, that segues into kind of maybe your independent work. Jeremiah, you did mention that you're teaching youth.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you could both talk just a little bit about that, just a couple of minutes on that.
Yeah, I currently am over there's a venue called Circus West. It's at the P&E, and they have an incredible program they've been running for, I'm guessing, about 30 years, where they have these wonderful classes for youth. They're very affordable, and they have an incredible venue because they're a nonprofit that's been subsidized, and you should absolutely, I cannot promote them enough. There's plenty of space for any kids who are interested, like if they enjoy dance, but they want to do something else, if they want to like learn how to juggle, unicycle, aerial, all these things are made available, and they have some amazing coaches and truly an amazing venue. Right now, I'm also over there in the capacity as a dance teacher as well as a tumbling coach, because it was just one of those moments where during COVID, they weren't able to get spotted, they weren't able to be held, and so what happens is that you can't really teach somebody how to do a backflip without making sure that they don't hurt themselves. Now, there's ways you can do it, but they're all terrible by comparison. So just being able to have hands-on and being able to help the youth collect these skills has been amazing. The past year has been a huge amount of reward for my heart to being able to teach these youth, because a lot of the skills I want to teach them is either about flow and spiral, but then for the most part with tumbling has been teaching them how to go for it, like with a type of an aggression or an assertiveness that they're just like, I will do this. Resetting the sound. I loved being able to create environments for them to develop the skill, to make the choice that says, I will land this skill, and to move with absolute certainty and trust and confidence. Because most of the skills I'm teaching, like you could do a backflip, but the thing is that you don't know how to do it and you don't believe that you could. So then you're not going to just throw yourself into the air. But the actual physical level to do a lot of these things is not very high. Meaning, once I can get somebody to teach to allow themselves to do something as terrifying as a backflip, then we can do anything else. Then I can say, hey, go do this other kind of crazy thing. And people are going to go, yeah, I think I can. Confidence.
Yeah, I think I'll just add on, you had mentioned our dancers, and Isaac Onquist, Ewan Onquist, Brenna Metzmeyer, Alex Tam, and Marissa Wong are so incredible because they've taken on the challenge of learning aerial. And when we started this creation for Throe, we were wondering, do we work with circus artists or do we work with dancers? And I think that we decided to work with dancers because of the kind of quality of movement that we wanted to see. Not that there's not quality of movement that circus artists have, but I think it has to do with the type of nuances in the physical expression we were looking for. And that kind of segues into what's coming next. We're looking to start classes. We're seeking funding right now to be able to teach professional dancers floor, like acrobatic dance and aerial dance. Hopefully the pilot project will allow us to offer these classes for free. So, people who are listening, if you're interested, keep an eye out, because we are hoping to do that. And then the other thing that I am simultaneously doing, juggling, as we all juggle many roles, is I am the director of programming at the Push International Performing Arts Festival, currently on maternity leave, but that's been an incredible opportunity as well to immerse myself in contemporary work, and I hope to continue to see as much as I can locally and internationally. It is an incredibly enriching opportunity.
Thank you so much. Thank you for taking on that job, and and also, and for both being here. I think we're richer for it, and all of your experiences are just so exciting and wonderful. Like all of the scales, from the nuance to the largest of scales, we're all benefiting so much from your experience and you being here, and very excited about all of that. Congratulations on your new family, both your Throe family and your home family.
I had a moment yesterday with our cast. We were just finishing up with the cat rehearsal, and we had our baby on the mat, and we were just like setting up, like I had been with him and then Gabrielle's being with him, and we're just saying thank you to everybody and just realizing, inviting them, like they really are in the, like you couldn't be more in our family energy, in our environment. We have our people we trust and we're like doing contact dance with, and over there we have our child safely in the same environment, and it just felt very like, yeah, as much as people talk about it being like it's like a family, it's like you're really in the room right now with our entire family. So it's
And speaking of, I think you might be able to hear Loic in the background. My dad is just humming to him to try and keep him calm. So he's in the space. He's part of our lives now.
Even better. So we have our music. The humming is our exit music from this interview. Yeah, thank you so much for taking this time, both of you. And I look forward to talking to you again. I'm sure I will in the next while.
Thank you so much, Claire.
Can you remind us of the show dates again?
November 17th to 19th at the Dance Centre.
Yeah, we'll post things in the description under the podcast as well. And we'll be sure to see you there. Thank you so much. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Claire.
Thank you so much for listening. We would love for you to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts, as this will help other listeners find us and help us to grow our dance audience. We'll be back next month. In the meantime, you can follow us on Facebook at The Dance Centre, Twitter at Dance Centre, and Instagram at The Dance Centre BC. And if you'd like to support our work, please consider making a donation. Just go to our website at thedancecentre.ca, where you'll find extensive information about our upcoming programs and events. The music for the Dance Centre podcast was composed by James B. Maxwell. Always a pleasure to connect with you through dance. Until next time.